Mr. Holt, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, so we have inflation that we haven't experienced since the 1970s. Like the Carter administration, the Biden administration has exacerbated price instability and the cost of consumer goods going up. And that's been exacerbated by federal spending. Obviously, the Fed has a certain role in monetary policy, but the fiscal house has a key ingredient to the experience that we have here in the United States, pre-Ukrainian invasion. So can you explain how massive spending bills impact inflation, price instability, and thereby housing prices as well?
Well, certainly in 2021, we saw a 6 percentage point increase in consumer price inflation in the U.S. That's only happened 3 times. The first time was in 1952 when the U.S. economy was growing rapidly, 10.5%, pretty big number, and the federal government increased its spending by 50% to prosecute the Korean War. Big federal spending in a hot economy, consumer price inflation jumped right up. Fed did nothing to offset it. That's exactly what we saw in 2021. The $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan was about a 50% increase in typical federal spending. Fed did nothing to counteract it. We saw a big jump in inflation in 2021. I think that's unquestionably a big root of the current inflation problem. The other episode is illustrative as well. That's 1974 with the OPEC oil embargo. Global oil prices quadruple overnight. That cost pressures in every business in America gets passed on to consumers. And we saw supply chain issues. Those are certainly part of the inflation story, but they're not all of it. That excessive federal spending, excessive stimulus produced demand across the board and rapid increases in prices.
So we see FHFA in response to the housing price, substantial change in housing prices, and because of a change of administration, they've raised the statutory limit for the maximum size of mortgages that Fannie and Freddie can buy. And now you have government-sponsored enterprises are enabling the financing of mortgages on homes sold up to $1,089,300 in some places across America. So translated, taxpayers will now be on the hook to guarantee $1 million homes in places like California, New York, and D.C. suburbs. Housing experts like former FHFA Director Ed DeMarco have observed that, quote, excessively high loan limits exacerbate the affordability crisis, end quote. Do you agree with Director DeMarco that this is that something's not right here?
I do. We've seen the track record of demand subsidies exacerbating high prices because of the inadequacy of supply. These are especially poorly targeted demand subsidies. They're $1 million homes. We're not exactly targeting those subsidies toward those who are most in need. So it's the worst of both aspects of that policy.
Okay, so to address inflation, what should Congress do?
First, it should not exacerbate the problem. I mean, that's the number one thing that a future Congress could do, is not put the U.S. in this position again. As I mentioned, now that inflation is entrenched, there are no good choices for combating it. And so don't put the U.S. in that position again by having fiscal policies that add up and don't exacerbate demand in an excessive fashion.
And if Congress could do one or two things on housing to increase the affordability of housing supply, enhance the supply of housing, what would you say?
I'd echo some of the things that Mark Zandi said, which is a carefully thought out long-term plan to increase supply is the key. A rapid response, trying to sort of solve this problem overnight, it really just produces a huge construction boom and exacerbates the inflation problem. This is the wrong time for that. So have a patient strategy that's going to increase the supply of rental, especially housing in the United States.
So a long-term approach to
Yes.
a long-term problem.
Yes.
Mr. Zandi, do you agree?
Yeah, I'd focus on the supply side here in the immediate future, and I do think the tax incentives that I mentioned in my remarks would be particularly effective in the near term. LIHTC, Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, Neighborhood Home Investment Act tax credits, new market tax credits. These are things that the infrastructure for getting that capital out into the marketplace is already there. It's well-functioning. The administration is making tweaks to these programs to make them more effective. Congress is passing legislation or proposing legislation to make them more effective.
Yes, thank you for your
Developers are
testimony.
good for it.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Holtz-Eakin.